Thank you for joining us for this webinar. This webinar is going to be about responding to FDA Form 483 observations. We're going to talk about the new guidance. And the webinar will be given by Rivka Zaibel, who is ADRES's owner, president, and founder. And Tamar, our CMC and QA director, will join us as a panelist. A few words about ADRES before we begin the webinar itself. We are a consultancy that works with startup companies in the pharmaceutical, biopharmaceutical, and medical device industry. We support your development from the regulatory side, QA side, and CMC for all of the stages, from proof of concept through the preclinical, non-clinical stages, and the clinical stages, all the way through the final submissions and approval. We work globally with companies around the world, usually focusing on the US market and EU market, and naturally Israel as well. And we have a subsidiary in the EU, in the Netherlands, to support non-European companies that want to develop their product in Europe. For today's session, we'll take about 45 minutes of the session itself, and then we'll leave a few more minutes for questions and answers. So please notice that you have a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can use it freely during the webinar to post your questions. And at the end of the webinar, according to the time that we have, and according to the relevance of the questions, we will answer them. If your question is left unanswered, please contact us directly and we'll be happy to assist you further. And now I'll give the stage to Rivka, who is also my mother. Please have a successful session, and thank you for this. Enjoy, everybody.
Thank you, Roy, and good afternoon and maybe good morning to those who joined us today. Thank you very much for joining us. I will start with presenting myself. I have 39 years of experience in the biopharmaceutical area. 21 of them I worked in a biopharmaceutical development and manufacturing company, Biotechnology General in Israel. And during that time, I hosted different FDA, EMA, Canadian, Israel, and notified bodies and other regulatory inspections. Since the establishment of the company 18 years ago, we assist companies in the development of their quality system and also preparations to inspections, different kind of inspections like mock PAI and routine GMP inspections for drugs, biological, and fill and finish facilities. I will start with an introduction before we get into the guideline itself. What actually is an FDA Form 483? It's funny because we all know that as 483 and assume that everybody knows and understands what it is. So an FDA Form 483 is issued to a firm management at the conclusion of an inspection when an inspector has observed any conditions that in their judgment may constitute violations of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. It is called 483 because that's the number of the form in the FDA documentation system. For which inspections is an FDA Form 483 issued. So usually it is for pre-approval inspections or GMP routine inspections. there are cases in which those are there are inspections for a cause. FDA got a complaint about a product or more than once complaints about a product, which may suggest that there is an issue with the quality of the product, the way it is manufactured, and they may request to inspect that facility. The FDA 483 forms apply to drugs, biologics, cell and gene therapy, medical devices, and combination products. It's the same form for the different kind of products. And the common reasons for observations are inadequacy of procedures to follow or establish cGMP, violation of the 21 CFR 210, 211, and other sections of the 21 CFR which are relevant to our industry. Inadequate process validation. Companies during a pre-approval inspection, the validation of their process will be subject of review by the inspectors, and if they realize that there were deviations during the process validations, issues that were not resolved, and they are still can be seen in the process itself, although it should have been resolved before process validation, that may result in an observation. A failure to properly investigate discrepancies or deviations. And one of the things that FDA inspectors do, and not only FDA, also the European and other authorities, they review the deviations that were reported during the year before the inspection, and they will assess whether they were investigated in a way that they reveal the root cause, that the root cause is well defined, and that it is in-depth investigation in order to understand the cause for the deviation, and that the relevant CAPA were developed and established and also executed. So that is one of the most common areas of 483's observations. Failure to define root cause, which is associated to the previous point. One of the things that is written also in this guideline is that the root cause is not the first thing that you reveal during the investigation. Sometimes the first thing that you reveal is something that it is very obvious and may be the root cause, but usually you need to get more in depth in order to understand what is the root cause of that deviation, of the discrepancy. Data integrity issues, that's something that you will see any data integrity issue that is revealed during the inspection may be reported in the 483, and the FDA or the inspectors will address that as a critical observation, even if the 483 doesn't actually define critical, major, minor, but they will discuss that as a critical issue. As one can imagine that if there are data integrity issues, the FDA may think that the data is not reliable, or that there are things that are not well documented, and that will definitely be sorry, that will be documented in the 483. Poor sanitization of the facility, that's also something that is a common reason for observation, and a lot of aspects related to that. The validation of the validation of the efficacy of the materials that are used for sanitization, whether there is a well-defined process for cleaning and sanitization of the facility and the equipment, also about the gowning of the operators, everything that has to do with the sanitization and the contamination in the facility may be result as an observation. So why this guidance matters? An FDA 483 response is voluntary, but it can be a primary input into FDA's decision on next steps. So the guideline actually is, I think that it's the first of its kind, because I've never seen for other regulatory authorities a document like that, which tell us who are subject to those inspections, what does the FDA expect from us when we address the 483 observations. So in principle, the response is voluntary as it is written in the guidance. However, if you don't address those observations, if you don't show that you understand what the observations are and that you are willing to apply everything that is needed in order to resolve them and to have corrective actions appropriate to the results of that inspection, then the FDA may escalate the process and even issue a warning letter, which is much critical than an FDA Form 483. So it is voluntary, but it is highly recommended to address the 483 observations as soon as possible and in a way that the FDA will understand that you are serious about that, you understand what they are requiring, and you are willing to do whatever is needed. So what a response should do, it should assess whether distributed product quality may be at risk. If it is a GMP routine inspection, that is what FDA will look at. You have, they have been in your facility, they have seen that there are repeated deviations out of specification results in the product that they have assessed, and their question will be, okay, if there are batches of this product in the market, can I rely on those products to be to meet the requirements, to meet the specifications? Can I be sure that everything that is on the market is actually appropriate? Explain actions taken and actions planned. I need to explain, when I address the 483 observations, I need to explain the FDA what are the actions that are going to be taken and what are the actions that are planned. And that should be in a way that it is clear what you are going to do, what are the timelines for that, and what is the scope of each one of the actions. Show scope, systemic issues, and affected products. So that is what the response should do. It should show the scope of your answer, whether you are addressing not only the issue that was mentioned by the FDA in the Form 483, but look at other aspects of this issue and try to convince FDA that there are no systemic failures, but that you are addressing everything so that it will not be expanded more than the scope of the observation itself. And affected products, meaning that if they found a deviation in one product and in your facility you are manufacturing other products similarly to that, or even in different processes and with different equipments, that you have looked at all the products that you manufacture and all the activities that you are conducting in your facility, and you are evaluating that as according to the observation raised by the FDA. And when I am talking about the assessment of distributed product quality, that may impact also product, not only the product subject to the inspection, but also other products manufactured at the same facility. We have seen more than once that the FDA, once they conclude an inspection, they will tell you either in writing or during the wrap-up meeting that if you manufacture and you have in your, if you have products in the market coming from the same facility, that you have to expand the investigation also to the products that are on the market, which were not the subject of the inspection. But once an observation was raised, they will ask you to evaluate everything that came from that facility. And of course, as whether it is applicable or not. The guideline does not change what GMP compliant requirements are. They keep talking about the GMP compliance and 21 CFR 210, 211, which are the cGMP guidelines. Promised or partial CAPAs do not prevent FDA from acting, and that goes to what I mentioned before. If the FDA receive your response and there are CAPAs there, but they don't feel that the CAPAs fully address the observations, they may escalate it to a warning letter, even if you are promising to provide more data later on. And I will talk about that in a minute more. FDA 483 observations are not the agency's final conclusion. Again, that goes, is an expansion of what I just said. The final conclusion is with the department head. It's not only by the inspectors that were in your facility, but it is approved by the department head by the FDA. And sometimes they may escalate or may expand the observations beyond what the inspectors mentioned already. What FDA expect in the written response? The guidance recommends a single organized submission that covers all observations and is supported by evidence. First of all, it should include the site identity, the establishment name, the full address, and the FEI, which is the facility establishment identification. It's a number that your facility gets when you register the facility with the FDA, and include a copy of the FDA 483. who prepared and signed. You should identify the person or the persons who prepared the answers and their signatory. Executive management should sign because it owns resources and commitments. It's not like the quality manager can sign on behalf of upper management. There should be a signature of the upper management because the answer to the FDA means I am willing to invest time, money, and people in order to resolve all the things that you have asked me to do. Investigation package, there should be an executive summary in a table format, and I will show you an example of the table. Risk assessment for each of the issues raised during the inspection that are reflected in the observations. The investigation scope, the root cause analysis, CAPA plan, interim actions, and effectiveness check. The plan for all of that should be in the answer. It is clear that when you send the first response to the FDA in order to address the observations, you have not completed all the CAPA activities. You may be at that point really ready with the CAPA plan for each one of the observations, but definitely, unless it was an easy and small correction, you don't have the full plan executed. But your answer should reflect what is your plan, at which step you will have part of the CAPAs resolved, at which step you believe that everything will be resolved, and you need to try and address those observations by criticality. Even if the inspector didn't tell you what is in his or her eyes more critical than others, by the nature of the observation, you can understand and realize what is the criticality of the observation and address them as first priority. Attachments, supporting documents, data, images, diagrams, and consultant materials should be signed and submitted in English. One thing that the guideline says is that if documents are prepared by a consultant, by an expert outside the facility, then you should include the expert recommendations or answers signed by that expert, because the FDA wants to be able to assess the expertise of those that were involved in preparing the answers to the different observations. And the attachments, for instance, you need to attach any procedure SOP that you have updated because of the observations. So it's not only that you mentioned that you are going to update your procedures, correct them according to the observation. You should submit to the FDA whenever you have those procedures updated, a copy of the updated observation in order for them to assess whether you have addressed appropriately the observation in the correction of the procedure. This is an example of the executive summary. The table looks like that. You have the FDA 483 observation, the number, including a brief description, descriptive name, for instance, calibration of a pipette. Let's assume that you have got an observation related to calibration of pipettes. So you will write the number of the observation and the descriptive name of the topic in which to which the observation was made. General category system means the facility, equipment, was it about a system, gowning? That means that is what you need to mention in the general category or system. Summary is a brief summary of the issue and the kappa, a kappa number, a target date for execution and completion of the kappa, and it should include any interim actions taken. Sometimes, in order to have all the activities in a kappa completed, you need to conduct several actions. So you need to include in the answer for a specific kappa which has several actions that need to be taken, each one of them by which they will be concluded, and also to mention that you will update FDA whenever you conclude one of those actions, so that they can assess the progress in each one of those actions. And also to mention the current progress of remediation. If it is the first time that you send the first response to the FDA, then you need to mention by each one of the observations whether you are going to initiate the kappa, whether you already initiated that and it is in progress, or whether it is completed. And for everything that is completed, you need to provide the evidence about what you have done and how is it documented. Describe any issues that may influence timing of completion. Sometimes you have an observation which may be considered critical, but it takes time to resolve that. For instance, I have been working with a company that during the FDA inspection, one of the kappa was that they need to build a new area for a process line, because it was in the same floor with a process and another process line that cannot be that they cannot be in the same area at the same time. So you cannot produce in those two lines different materials that may result in some kind of contamination. And therefore, the FDA actually requested them to move one of the lines to another area in the facility. And that's not something that can be resolved in 15 days, nor in 1 month. So for an activity like that, you need to provide the FDA in your initial response a plan with timelines for all the activities related, and whether those activities may influence the timing of completion of other activities that are related to the inspection. What else FDA is asking us to do now? So it is mentioned repeatedly that everything should be risk-based, documented, and credible remediation. Timing and submission mechanics. FDA recommends sending one complete response within 15 business days to maximize the chance of detailed FDA review. What FDA mentions in the guideline is that the FDA, and I am quoting from the guideline, FDA will not ordinarily delay regulatory action, such as issuing a warning letter, to review a response to an FDA 483 that is received more than 15 business days after the FDA 483 was issued. So if there was a critical observation in the 483, and within 15 days, within 15 calendar days, the company submitted the initial response to the FDA 483. And in that initial response, the company commits to resolve the observation that is considered critical, but not everything about that response, that resolution of the observation is mentioned in the response, because it may take time, because maybe the company doesn't know yet how to resolve exactly that observation. FDA may escalate it to a warning letter without waiting for additional information. And that is something that I think it is the first time that I see that, and I have never experienced such a situation that the warning letter comes before the company has the opportunity to respond to an observation. What I've seen is that if the initial response suggests that the company didn't understand correctly the observation, or that the initial response suggests that the company doesn't intend to resolve the issue as FDA expected, then that will maybe escalated to a warning letter. So the way that it is written now in this draft guideline is actually more challenging. And one of the things that the FDA does in this guideline is suggest that you use consultants, experts, to assist you in the resolution of the issue, in the way that you present that in your responses, so that you have more chance to convince FDA that you know what you are doing. And specifically, they mentioned the need to have consultants involved in the responses to FDA when it relates to data integrity. I may suggest that it's not only about data integrity. There are several areas in which, by our experience, you will get definitely an advantage by having experts involved in the way to address the FDA 483. One of the things that you also need to know, if it's the first time that you are going to address a 483 observations, it is definitely highly recommended to have someone experienced to review that, to see that the language and the way that you are expressing yourself and addressing the observations is such that the FDA will understand and will feel that you really address the issues the way that they were expecting. So that's about the 15 business day. Send electronically to the email address on the form 483, split files over 100 megabyte, or coordinate alternative ways of transfer of length attachments. Interim reporting, I mentioned that earlier. If remediation is not complete, provide preliminary results, interim controls, milestone dates, and a plan for follow-up reports, communication plan, tell FDA what updates you intend to send, when you will send them, and what each update will contain. It is also very important if it is an 483 that was issued during a pre-approval inspection. If there is a PDUFA date by which the FDA will tell the company whether the product was approved or not, and you are in the process of addressing 483 observations, ensure that the responses to all observations and of course to the critical and major one will arrive on time for the FDA to review them before the PDUFA date, before the date by which they need to agree, they need to decide whether the product can be approved or not. That is really critical. So how to address the observations? I think that I mentioned that until now, but I will repeat it in a more organized way. Clarify the observation, review complaints, records, interviews, and applicable regulations or guidance. Ensure that you understand the observation. Don't start answer without being sure that you understood what the observation is and what is expected from you. Escalate. Facility and corporate management should review the 483, commit resources, and set multidisciplinary ownership. You need to understand that you need the support of your management in order to not only to address the observation, but also to resolve that. Investigate, use a written, scientifically justified risk-based plan that looks for root cause, related trends, and connected observations. And expand, and which this is something that the FDA, this guidance speaks about that very in details. Assess whether other products, processes, sites, equipment, or contractors are affected and widen scope accordingly. As I mentioned earlier, if you have got an observation about a specific process and you have similar processes in the facility for other products or for the same products but in other areas, expand the investigation to all of them and provide the FDA with evidence that you understand that it is not just observation about one thing, that you understand that you will need to expand your investigation and CAPA plan to address everything that might be related or might be similar to that observation. That is the way that you show them that you are in you are addressing your quality system and you are ensuring that you are learning from that and implement that for other areas of activities in your facility. And repeat, if one thing that is also very important, when FDA comes for an inspection, which is not the first time in that facility, they will look for repeat observations, for trends, and hidden systematic gaps matter as much as the cited condition itself. So if I had an inspection a month ago, and there were their observations about the way that I handle raw materials. And a year from now, FDA comes back to the facility, and let's say that we have resolved the issues, or you have implemented the CAPA relevant to those observations about the raw materials. But a year from now, FDA comes for a routine GMP inspection, and they again find issues related to the management of raw materials. That repeated observation, the trend about that they will find actually may result in a warning letter, because it means that although you have provided answers to your previous observations from a year ago, you actually didn't implement that in your quality system, and you still have issues with the same kind of observations. So you need to understand that when they will come, they will look at that, and also not only on observations that they had in a previous inspection. If it is the first time that they come and they start looking at the analytical methods, and they find that in one of the analytical method validation, you failed to execute that according to the guidance, and then they look at another analytical method, and then in there they found something similar to the first issue, that will actually suggest to them that you actually don't know how to validate your analytical methods, or that you are failing in that, and that may actually suggest that if it is a pre-approval inspection, that they will not approve the GMP status of the facility, or the readiness of the facility to have a product in the market. And you need to be really very careful about the fact that if they find one observation, which might be minor the first time that they find it, but if they see that repeatedly during the audit, they will mention that as a repeated observation, which suggests that there is a failure in your quality system. Okay, the CAPA, build it early, verify it later. FDA recommends starting CAPA planning during or immediately after the inspection. Then updating the plan as the investigation matures. So, and that's something that I can tell you from my experience. During the inspection itself, if there are issues that you can resolve during the inspection, for instance, if there is a comment about the way that a procedure is described, it is written, and you can resolve that during the inspection, you can show that you have corrected that, and also that it is feasible to implement that correction. Because if you correct a procedure, but you cannot implement that immediately, that will not be considered by them as correcting something during the inspection. But if you correct the procedure and you show them that you can implement that during the inspection, then it might be that they will not mention that as an observation, or that they will mention that it was resolved during the inspection. So that is one aspect. The other one is that start thinking about the CAPA during the inspection, so that you can ensure that during the wrap-up meeting, you can present the idea of how you are going to resolve that, and sometimes they are willing to have a short discussion about that during the wrap-up meeting. So how to build a CAPA? First of all, risk assess whether the observation has any impact on patient, product, and distribution risk, the root cause, more than the first obvious explanation, as I mentioned earlier. Implement CAPA, what are the actions, who are the owners, timelines, and deliverables, and check effectiveness. At the end of the process, you need to have a system for monitoring the effectiveness of the CAPA. If you disagree with an observation, and that happens a lot, scientific or technical disagreements should be clearly framed, evidence-based, and raised as early as possible. So during the inspection, if there is an observation that you think it is not appropriate or that it may result in a misunderstanding by the inspector, raise it. You can raise it either during a morning meeting with the inspectors. It is usually it's a practice usually during inspections to have a morning meeting with inspectors or at the end of the day meeting to get from them what they have covered until that point and whether they have any observations. And you can, during that meeting, try to understand or seek clarification during the inspection about that specific observation, and try to, if you believe that they didn't understand your process and you want to explain it to them, you can suggest it, and usually they will agree with that. I am not saying that you will convince them, but you should try to do that so that at least you know that they understood the situation and the observation has logic. That's what you need to understand. Ground your position. You can reference applicable statutes, regulations, guidance, or recognized standards to support your technical rationale if it is relevant. If still unresolved, you can describe the contested facts in the written response and provide scientific data plus supporting references. And if that doesn't help, then you can escalate that and you can contact the FDA ombudsman or the office directing the inspection for additional dispute resolution. I can tell you that once in my life I was in that situation in the facility that I worked for. There was an FDA inspector that was an expert in medical devices and specifically in computerized systems. He was not an expert in drugs, biologics, etc., which was the reason for the inspection. And one of his observations made no sense. We tried to raise that during the meeting, the wrap-up meeting with the inspector. He was not convinced. He didn't agree with our approach. So we escalate that to the inspection, to the direction of that, sorry, to that, oh, sorry. to the office, the director of the office who was responsible for the inspection, and resolve that with them. So to summarize the issue of the response, it's a strong response shows command of risk, scope, accountability, and execution, not just intent. Stabilize risk, assess distributed product inventory, expiry, and etc. Confirm scope, link observations, review trends, and prior inspections in order to determine whether other products, equipment, sites, or vendors are implicated. Build the package, prepare it in an organized way with a good executive summary, detailed investigations, all the attachments signed by the relevant people and in English, and commit to follow through. Use a communication plan in order to agree with the FDA by when you will have everything resolved and what are the updates that you are going to provide the FDA during by the time of the final resolution. Remember the 15-day target, the management signed, evidence-backed, CAPA plus follow-up. To conclude the session, be well prepared to the inspection, use consultants to assist you being prepared, be proactive during the inspection. If acceptable by the inspector, suggest a short wrap-up every day on the morning or the next day to ensure there is no misunderstanding, which will translate into observations at the end of the inspection. Try to correct things during the inspection and provide relevant evidence to the inspector. Start developing a CAPA plan immediately at the end of the inspection. Ensure responses are provided within 15 calendar days. If you consider any of the observations to be critical, try to send the initial response within even 10 calendar days so that you are not getting to the situation that the FDA may escalate that to a warning letter. Your response needs to convince the inspectors that you fully understand the observations and are taking all measures to resolve them in a timely manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was fascinating, and we got a few responses that shared the same feeling as I do. And we do have a few questions from the audience. Tamar, if you could help us with this, maybe you have a few questions of yourself, and we do have a couple of questions from the audience. So maybe we can start with Sarit's question.
Sure. So the first question is relating to the order of the observations in the 483s. In the past, it was suggestive that of the criticality, meaning the first observation was the most problematic, etc. And is this also reflected in the new guideline, or is it rejected in the new guideline?
Can you repeat it, because I'm not sure that I understood?
Yes, in the past, the order of the 483s in the letter was from the most critical one to the less critical one, according to the question, and whether it's reflected anyway in this guideline.
No, it's not, and my experience is that it does not. It sometimes the first observation may be the most critical one, but then they don't keep the order in all 483s. And the other aspect, which is very important, is that sometimes there are several observations which are less critical, that are major or minor, but if you read the 483, you see that there are connection between them, and they will look at that as a combination of observations that suggest that something is major there. So usually the first one, and I also read it that way, the first one is the most critical or relevant for the inspectors.
Okay. Okay. Another question
But the guideline doesn't talk about it.
Okay. Another question is, could an FDA inspector continue reviewing documents electronically after the closing meeting and raise additional observations? For example, if the site keeps the access to the SharePoint available. Does the guideline
To
relate
my
to that,
knowledge, no. It is not. They can do during the days of the inspection, they can take documents with them if the facility allows that and review them while they are in the hotel and come in next morning to talk about them. But after the close-up of the inspection, they cannot do that. It's
Okay.
not written in the procedure, but because the procedure is how to address the observations and know the conduct of the audit.
Okay, another question that I'm not clear, but maybe you will, or if you can elaborate more. Do the manufacturer should add the Form 483 process into their procedures? So I'm not sure I understand
I
the
don't
question.
understand.
Okay.
As a reference to a procedure?
I'm not sure either.
Maybe
I had a
the
question,
one
maybe you can elaborate, the person who asked for that. And I had another question relating to the executive summary table that you mentioned. Is it mandatory according to the?
according to the guideline, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just thinking that the last time that I worked on a 483 response, we actually did that way.
Okay. With the
But
table. So now
it was
it's
not because
specified.
of a guideline, it was because of the easiness of preparing the answers. But now, when the guidance will become final, I think that it will be mandatory. And my experience with FDA is that any draft guidance is as if it was final, so it's highly recommended.
Okay, I think that's it. Anyway.
Okay, thank you. And for our audience, thank you for joining us. And please stay tuned for our next webinars. The next one is planned to be on process validation. So you might find it interesting as well. So keep in touch via LinkedIn or WhatsApp to be informed. And again, we will send you the presentation of this webinar, and we will upload the recording and the summary of today's webinar to our website, to our blog, so you can watch it again or share it with your colleagues. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again, Rivka. Thank you, Tamar, and goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you all for participating.